Call the meeting to order, please. Right, for the pledge of allegiance real quick.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
How many of the minutes would be available? You have the June 8th minutes. They were also distributed last night to you.
Yep.
So if you wanted to have those, that would be great.
Motion to accept the minutes from the June 8th meeting.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Now we'll discuss possible action after our public hearing.
Attorney Mednick has a proposal, a proposed change to section 2-8. I don't have the hard copies, but he can bring it up on the screen and read it to you.
Mr. Chair, before we get into that, Julie and I talked briefly, and we think the firefighter one that Jim Simon brought up last night is something we should consider. And obviously, you know, we feel strongly about the Board of Ed and everything going on with the Board of Ed, and listening to the comments last night, I think we could pretty much get out of here unanimously. We'll drop our Board of Finance thing. I think we heard of some things at the public hearing that swayed us a little bit. I'm really fearful of the Board of Ed issue, that it could sink other issues. I think it would be a nice thing for the town to have this all get out unanimously from the Charter Revision Committee. I think that's the only issue that Julie and I are stuck on. If we could work something out, maybe talk about it a little bit, then we would withdraw our other ideas for motions and other things and just keep the Board of Ed the way it is before Attorney Mednick. The only reason I'm bringing it up now is you just said Attorney Mednick's going to go into it. So if at all it would be considered, if we want to take a 5-minute recess and think about it, I think we could get this out unanimously in all the other areas minus the Board of Ed.
I feel strongly about giving the voters the option. And when it goes to the council, they can decide whether to push the question forward or not.
Can't there? Oh, I'm sorry, Charlie. Go ahead.
They don't have to accept all our proposals, I believe. Council can adjust the questions, is what I'm told.
So what happens is that, and Attorney D'Onofrio can correct me, is you'll do your presentation on Tuesday at the council, and the council will set their public hearing. Public hearing is going to be scheduled for July 12th at 6 o'clock, and then it will go for whatever time, and then they'll start their council meeting at 7 o'clock. They could take up items at the July 12th, but it probably won't be until July 26th. And at that point, the council can make recommendations back to you and say one of them is that to please don't go forward with the Board of Ed. You guys would then have to have a meeting, talk about what the council recommendations are, but you don't have to accept them.
Okay.
You're the authority here.
All right. I would
D'Onofrio, is that correct?
I would still like the input from the council. I got an awful lot of requests for the Board of Ed questions to be on there from people. I personally didn't want to put it on. I thought we were trying to keep this really tight, but it became such a hot button issue. And last night I kept tally and it was about 50-50 on the comments. So I'm gonna ask her to go forward to the council. If the council gives us negative feedback after that, we could change our minds again.
Okay, I just wanted to offer it before Attorney Mednick.
I appreciate that. So what would the change to the language be, sir?
Yeah, it's relatively minor. If I could put it up on the screen, if that helps everybody.
Please.
Or is it up on your screen? Do you see it? 281?
Probably see it easier behind us, I think. for us. Visually impaired folks.
Yeah, oh, yeah. 281.
Where is it?
Do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, it's the last paragraph, it's the last sentence of both sections. And what I did is, I was using this language in another town, and as we were going through it, we were concerned about the way it read. You could have a situation where the so-called minority party could actually be the top vote getter and the second top vote getter, and then lose because the next three vote getters are the other party. And so the language just clarifies that once you have three candidates declared the winner of one political party, then the remaining seats or seat, in the case of the 4-candidate cycle, would go to the so-called minority party. I think the language just clarifies that. That's all. That's the only change.
Thank you. Any questions for the attorney on that?
So I just want to clarify, so the top 3 seats determine the remaining seats.
Yeah, the top 3, well, what determines the remaining seats is once one party obtains a majority, in effect,
Right.
they become the majority party. It could be the Republicans or the Democrats, doesn't make any difference. Once that's determined, then the remaining seats or seat would go to minority party. It could be a Democrat, it could be an unaffiliated, it could be a communist, whatever it might be. They would get the minority seats that are left at that point. I think that the second sentence clarifies that. I haven't had a chance to go over it with Jeff, but I did go over it with one of my other town attorneys. We were trying to recast similar language in another charter. And so I think it just clarifies that point.
And the rationale being you don't have one party with the majority on the Board of Education.
You know, you do have majorities. The way minority party representation works, it's kind of a misnomer. It's really should be called a cap on majority party representation. So it doesn't allow a majority party to have more than X number of seats. And the way we've established it here in the 5-candidate cycle, it's 3 candidates. And once a majority party hits the 3 candidates, then the other seats are filled by candidates other than the majority party.
Okay,
In the 4-election cycle, once you hit the 3 seats, then the 1 seat that remains has to be held by a person who is not of the quote majority party.
okay, thank you.
So this goes into effect really when we have that in 2025, when we start having the election.
Yes.
Petition.
That's correct. It does not take effect. As you remember, the way we developed this kind of an accordion, where we're going to push the accordion in to move from the petitioning Board of Education to the Title IX Board of Education, which will have party identity as part of the election process. In your first election cycle, you're going to have all 9 members run, 5 of them for a 4-year term and 4 of them for a 2-year term. And the breakdown will be set in that election, and then it has to be continued throughout. So once the class of 4 gets through their first 2-year term, they then go to a 4-year term, so that every 2 years you will have a cycle of candidates for the Board of Education in the municipal election year.
Are the 2-year terms seated first?
They'll all be seated simultaneously. When you elect the Board of Education, I believe in 2025, I believe it is, they will be elected as one body. It'll be an election for the entire 9-member body. And I think the max will be 6 members of one party. And once one party hits the 6, then the remaining members, the other 3 members, would be of of another party, not of the majority party. So they could be, if the
On the
Democrats have,
ballot.
yeah,
So on the ballot, there's going to be people who are running for the 2-year term and people who are running for the 4-year term.
so the parties will nominate their candidates. They'll nominate a slate of 5 for a 4-year term, and they'll nominate simultaneously a slate of 4 for a 2-year term.
But who do I seat first, the 2-year term or the 4-year term?
Well, they all get seated simultaneously. If they win the election, the winners of the election will all be seated at the same time. The term won't make a difference. It's just that the people with the 2-year term will be running for re-election 2 years hence.
So when the parties nominate, they're nominating for a specific term limit. Is that what you're saying?
That's
fine.
correct. They will nominate 2 different classes of candidates.
Okay.
And your ballot will have to be clear to state that these are the candidates that this is the slate for the 4-year term of the 2 parties, and whoever else runs, petitioning candidates, minor party candidates, will be running for a 4-year term. And then you'll have a slate that is running for a 2-year term.
But in seating with minority representation, I need to know who I'm seating first. The 2-year term, because you're going to have 4 candidates that will be seated. And I don't know how many will be from Democrats. I mean, is it the top 3?
You would do it by class. So with the 5, you just follow the rules that I just showed in 281 to determine how the 5 candidates are classified, how they are seated, and then the other candidates would be seated at the same time. But you can't have a result that would, and you shouldn't have a result based on these rules where you have more than 6 people from either party, because the parties can only nominate up to the number that can actually serve. And so you'd have to make a determination at the
So
time.
Democrats run 4 for the 2-year term. And then for the
3.
4-year term, they run 5. They're running a total of 9 candidates.
No, they're going to run 3. No more than 3 can serve in the they're going to nominate 3 on each side, basically, is what it comes down to. And you could vote for all 5, but only 3 can be seated from either party. That's the max that any party could be seated with. And so once a party hits the max number, then the remaining seats will go to the so-called minority party.
So the candidates will run for a 2-year term. They won't run
Correct.
for the 4-year.
Some will run for a
Vice
4-year
versa.
and some will run for a 2-year. Yeah.
I
You'll
don't
have
have a problem with the 2-year or 4-year. That's not my concern. My concern is that, and how the top vote getters of the 2-year term, do I see first? So that then I know who is going to take the 6. I mean, that's what I'm concerned with. Yeah. Yeah, the different classes don't bother me. It's seating them.
Candidates, we're going to nominate candidates up to 3 spots. So the top 3 by class gets seated.
If one party wins all 3 seats in both cycles, then they're maxed out at 6. That's all they can have anyhow. That's the way it's set up. The parties can only nominate the maximum number that can be elected. So if one party wins the 3 seats in both classes, the class of 5 and the class of 4, then they can only have 6 seats. And that's permitted under the overall rule. And then the remaining seats would be determined by the category. The 2 remaining seats in the 5-member class would be the quote minority party, could be the Democrat or Republican if they're the minority, or it could be an unaffiliated petitioning candidate. It could be a minority depending on how they get their votes. So that you could have no more than 6 elected in the first election, and it should work that way all the way through. You could never have more than 6 elected from the majority party.
When you face still concerned, Kate, I want to make sure that
I don't hear.
I we'll go along with it. If both of you are saying it's gonna work.
All right, I'll talk to you privately if you'd like, Kate, and go through it, but it does work, I believe. And if it doesn't, we'll fix it at the council. Let's just put it that way.
I appreciate that you looked at that closely and felt that there needed to be a change. I think that was important to help with that. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Since we're on Board of Education, Mr. Chair, would this be an appropriate time for a question that I had?
Sure.
Attorney Mednick, I was curious about under the first step of the transition, where it states, no party designation shall appear in connection with the names of candidates for said board. I was just curious to make sure I understood how broadly that is cast for saying no party.
Yeah, it's exactly what you have right now. That language was taken from the stricken language in your charter so that the elections through the time that you have the 2025 election, the elections up until that time will be conducted exactly the way they are now. And no one gets a party designation on the ballot. But one of the things I was a little confused about at your public hearing the other day is anyone can find out who the candidates, what party the candidates are enrolled with. That's a public record. So you can find that out, but that shows up nowhere on the ballot whatsoever. The parties do not run candidates, but people who are affiliated with parties can petition to go on the ballot.
There's always, excuse me, there's always been I guess it's been an unwritten custom in Berlin that parties didn't come out and publicly support a particular candidate, and candidates didn't publish their party affiliation. And I assumed that was part of the charter restriction, but I guess it's not. If a candidate wanted to run and put a donkey on their sign or an elephant, that would be permitted.
Well,
No, that's
again,
a different question. Yeah.
I mean, there's a
You
difference.
gotta have a mic. I already got a text from Arosh saying that your mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's better, but it's a little ringing.
Okay. There's a difference between the manner in which candidates are nominated and elected and the manner in which campaigns are conducted. Okay. You have to, when conducting a campaign, comply with the statutory requirements of the Election Enforcement Commission. And under the applicable statutes, spending money causes certain obligations to be triggered. So in terms of what you can do, anybody can put a sign on their lawn saying, I'm running for Board of Ed. I am a Democrat. I'm running for Board of Ed. Elect me. You could write a letter, I'm running for town council, and Jeff and Steve and Kate have my support for Board of Ed, or they're part of the Republican team. I mean, there's things that don't cost money are fine. It's when you incur expenditures. And the reason why expenditures matter is because there's only a couple of different ways that campaigns can spend money. You can have the town committee. And when you're nominated at a nominating convention over the summer, you fill out a form. And that form indicates to the Secretary of State's office how your campaign is going to be funded. Are you self-funding? Are you funding through a candidate committee? Are you funding through the town committee? And that's all part of, election law reform that took place 20 plus years ago. So there's nothing that stops anyone from exercising First Amendment rights and saying who's a Republican and who's a Democrat. That's whether it's petition or otherwise. It just comes into, how you campaign, what you can spend money on, what you can put on social media, whose social media page it is, whether expenditures are being incurred. And if so, how is that reported? In other words, if you're not nominated by a party and they are expending funds to advance your election, SEEC is going to have a problem with that. Okay. So it really comes down to whether money's being spent and by whom and for what purpose. Okay.
Attorney D'Onofrio, but the candidates themselves under the current charter could spend money. It's just, it has to be reportable to SEEC, correct?
Yeah, they just have
There's
to, they just
guidelines.
have to register with SEEC.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I'm assuming because this last go around, there was a group called New Members, New Voices who were running the several candidates. And I know that they had put up signs. And I talked to one of the candidates, they were kind of pooling money together, so.
They register with me.
Yeah.
on the municipal election or on a.
Yeah. So it's not prohibitive for a petitioning candidate or candidates to spend money. They just
No,
have to
there's a
follow the
really
rules.
helpful guidebook that gets published
Right.
by SEEC for municipal candidates. It sets out if you want to self-fund your campaign,
Right,
what dollar threshold triggers the filing and reporting requirements, and what prohibited expenditures are, and who you can take money from and who you can't take money from. And there's the whole idea behind the system is to have a level playing field. And the only way you have a level playing field is if you have transparency and accountability. So
absolutely.
that's all that the SEEC process does. It doesn't say, oh, you didn't go through a party, so you're a lesser type of candidate or anything like that. That's just not the way it works.
Right. But under a current charter, they could in fact identify themselves other than on the ballot.
Sure. They're not on the
as a
ballot
Democrat
because
or
they didn't get,
Republican.
they're not on the ballot because they didn't get nominated by a party to be
Right.
on a line in the
Okay.
ballot. That's all.
Okay.
Yep.
They were always governed by those laws. Those laws have been in effect since post Watergate laws. I was the first director of the State Elections Commission back when I got 22 years old. And those laws have been on the books since the mid 1970s.
And I asked because, I was listening to the citizens that came in and listening to the candidate when they ran last time, and they said they couldn't answer that question. So I just wanted clarification on that. So thank you very much.
Sure.
And Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, a majority of the Board of Ed candidates actually file to spend less than whatever the dollar amount is. I know. Yeah.
And it's either they're they're gonna self-fund their campaign. That's usually what they're putting out.
That's by choice. They're entitled to
Yes.
raise money if they'd like to.
Right.
So we all set with the Board of Ed?
Okay, I have a crazy question. And I'm not knowledgeable in a lot of areas, so please don't laugh. But if there was a PAC determined or set up for a Board of Education who are running independently, would that be considered backed by a Republican Party or a Democratic Party?
Well, when you talk about a PAC is a funding source, right? A PAC is not a candidate committee. A PAC is a properly registered political action committee that can make contributions to various types of campaigns. So, again, if you're a petitioning candidate, as long as you comply with the SEEC registration and filing requirements and the contributions that you're accepting are not prohibited, or the expenditures aren't prohibited and the contributors aren't banned, because there's different types of campaigns that can't accept contributions, for example, from state contractors. So there's different restrictions, but a PAC is a potential funding source for anybody that's seeking election to public office.
And it can also be bipartisan, correct? It can be composed of both Dems and Republicans or one side or the other.
It can be whatever the
Yeah.
organizers want it to be.
Right.
Just note of caution, and not that you're thinking about it, but anytime that you have political action committees involved in an election, they cannot be coordinating with the campaigns either. So they can go out there and advocate for it, but if there's proven that there's any coordination and they declare differently, they're also going to get in hot water with the elections. So, yeah. They can do a slate committee, even if they're of different parties, and call it a slate. They're running as a slate, and they could pool their money and spend it, but that's also a filing with, well, you probably get it because it's a municipal election. So it sounds like we can actually get the information of the political party without changing anything on the Board of Ed, correct? It's a public record, it's a voter file. I can send an FOI to get the entire voter file tomorrow, and I'll just look up and say, Julie's a Democrat, Joe's a Democrat, right down the list. People can find out if they want.
Voter registration is public, it's available. As long as it's not the only time that person probably wants to run for office is somebody who
Jeff.
is restricted.
Yeah, so we have certain members that we've deemed a protected class, police officers and others that are exempt from the FOI statute. So they would be purged from the voter file when the person receives it. Yeah.
All right.
Well, what was happening was people were FOIing voter files and other things to find out the home addresses of correctional officers, police officers, judges. Yeah, it protects their home address.
So they have to request it.
Just one thought I had, Joe, when you were talking, yeah, that information is accessible. I don't know that every person has that ability to find that information, but it's at the voting time when I think transparency needs to be clear, which is, I think, why I'm supporting the change in Board of Education and the charter.
And we talked about it a little bit, with some of my members on our town committee. And either one of the town committees can put out anything, even on a flyer saying, just, for information, the candidates for Board of Ed, these are their quote, registered parties. They can get it and put it out. There's no prohibitions on that. So if either party wanted to just pull the list of the voters and cross-reference it with the candidates and put it out and just say, hey,
I
we heard.
guess the big misconception, that was always prohibited.
Well, you
Now
do, not
finding
to
out.
interrupt, but you do have to be a little bit careful because the SEEC does, there is a statutory, if it's advancing the candidacy of the candidate, then that candidate should be funding it. It shouldn't be funded by, I've had complaints in other municipalities, never Berlin, but other municipalities. There's been complaints filed by folks against each other post-election because, I'll give you an example, right? Someone's running for first selectman. At the nominating convention, it's his first time on the ticket. He's trying to bolster credibility. At the nominating convention, he has everybody on the ticket, 30 people, stop on their way in for a 30-second video. He then takes that video, puts it all over social media. Look at all these great people supporting me, right? You would think it's advancing the candidacy of the first selectman. SEEC says, well, it's advancing their candidacy too. And the campaign for first selectman paid for it. They should have paid for a part of it. So you can send those mailers out. You just got to be a little bit careful who pays for them and what the attribution is. That's all.
And what else is said on the flyer? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But even if you just identify the candidates and what their party affiliations, whether it be D or R or unaffiliated or whatever else, to get it out for informational purposes could be helpful without sanctioning any particular candidate within that flyer.
Yes.
Okay, once again, I'd like to advance this to the council. And these are all good points. I hope somebody brings them up to public hearing.
Well, my concern is I think, back in 2016, the voters voted against a partisan Board of Ed and also had enough concern that they voted down some of the language changes. So I do think we're putting at risk some of the hard work that we did in some of the other areas, as was indicated back in 2016. That was the result, was the Charter Revision Commission worked hard on a number of things. They did not, the Board of Ed becoming partisan did not pass, but so did several other things because of the concern of the voters that there might have been some language in there that inadvertently would trigger something. There was a lot of concern about that. So I'm concerned that we're not going to meet the task that was charged to us by the town council originally, by including the Board of Ed, besides the fact that I don't support the Board of Ed going partisan.
I'm gonna remain for the change. It's not 2016 anymore. And to me, all the things that were put at risk seem, I mean, they're vague to me. I wasn't there. I don't know what we're talking about actually. I understand a lot of the verbiage may have lent to some of the confusion. Maybe if we're clearer now, people will be, and with the flyers and the ability now that we're past that misconception of not being able to announce their party association, it doesn't mean that the people will all benefit from those flyers and they can miss them, this and that, and at the polls will be their last opportunity to really identify their candidates. And I think it's important not to miss that. I just saw too much confusion last time. It was just over and over, people came out, no matter which place I was standing at.
I believe that attorney wants to.
Oh, I'm sorry, attorney.
Thank you. Yeah, not to interfere with your debate, and I apologize, but I do want to make a point of information. And Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that the provision that allows you to have the petitioning candidate provision for Board of Education, everybody's been talking about it's grandfathered, which means it's grandfathered from a special act that predates home rule, that predates 1957, 58, and certainly the constitutional amendment in the mid-1960s. If in fact that is the case, if and when you were to repeal this provision and you move to the new system, you cannot go back. Once you walk away from your special act, you've basically repealed the special act. So then you can reform the system, the 5-4 system. You could have a 15-member board, you could have a 7-member board, but you can't go back to a nonpartisan petitioning board. I just thought that was important for you to understand from a charter perspective in terms of how home rule works. You don't have a right. Instead of 2 towns having it, there will be only 1 town that will have a nonpartisan petition opportunity for boards of ed. Once you move away from that, you can't go back to it. So you need to be absolutely certain that this is what you want to do. I just wanted to make that clear from a legal perspective.
Candidates will still be allowed to petition, correct?
Oh yeah, anyone can petition under Title
It'll be
IX.
the 1% threshold.
I think it's 1%. It's a very low percentage. So yeah, people can petition, minority parties.
Want to make sure that won't
candidates.
change. They can still petition the way they do now and be.
Yeah, but you can't go back to the nonpartisan
Only.
cycle that you have right now. That's the only thing I wanted to point out for the record.
Right,
Can I just add some points for consideration? I think that's brought up last night. I know that there is no public comment. I really try and respect that.
We're listening, please.
So it's Julia Dennis, 150 Norton Road. Last night, I got sidetracked from what I had written, and two of my biggest points, one, what you guys are talking about right now, anytime I go to Board of Ed conferences, which I go to twice a year, they always brainstorm how to get the best possible candidates. And oftentimes it comes back to parties can't get the best candidates because they're running their best candidates for town council, board of finance, state rep. So they get the worst candidates, the least committed, and they have a terrible time recruiting people. And it's come up, I have pictures of the chart where people are like, I wish we could go is a really important point to consider.
I've said it.
And I hear it from a lot of Republicans and Democrats. It's not just one party over the other. It's a common thing across the state. So I would recommend reaching out to other towns before you send it off to town council and see their thoughts. They get the worst candidates because they want to put their best people for the more important positions. And second, in my 7 years in this town serving, when parents feel their education is threatened, they come out to vote and they come out and they mobilize. And I think this last election, oh, sorry. I think this,
Excuse me, I just want to make sure we don't get in trouble by allowing one person in an audience of citizens. This wasn't advertised. Are we violating any trust or?
Charlie, I have a problem with it unless you're gonna let me speak too.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, is everybody needs to be allowed to
Okay.
speak.
So,
I make a motion that we take a 5-minute recess.
can I just finish what I was saying?
Well,
No,
I think it's better if we take a recess, than if you want to talk to individuals, you can.
right.
Mr. Chair, will you entertain a 5-minute
well,
recess?
then we're gonna take a recess for Mr. Millard and whoever else is
Oh,
out
okay.
there. And I want to be fair to everybody. We had our public hearing last night and there will be another one. Let me
I
stress
understand
that.
that, but I think it's just, they were two important points to consider
And-
before you guys go
And we've
off.
heard your points. Thank you.
Thanks.
I withdraw my motion.
Thank you. I'm just trying to keep a
Yeah,
level
I got
playing
you.
field.
And I understand, I have to deal with that at the Board of Ed too, and that's why I'm really just trying to be respectful, but I think they're important points to consider.
There was a lot of good information last night and a lot of things to think about. And I'm not sure how I feel about this. I just know I've been asked for from so many constituents, they want a chance to vote on it. So that's what I'm pursuing from my point of view. I'd like a consensus.
I did mention
our
as
committee.
well, when I was on the Board of Ed, this was probably about 4 meetings ago, the same thing would occur where I would go to statewide conferences, and we were the envy as well. I was on the Board of Ed for 9 years of other districts, and point well taken. And we had trouble even getting people for this commission. I understand, volunteerism, so to speak, because we know the Board of Ed is a volunteer role and it's huge, by the way. It's not just 2 meetings a month. There's lots of committee work and other things that you have to attend to as a Board of Ed member.
I'm not making light
We
of
do
their
want the
service.
best candidates. We want people who are committed to the educational needs of the students in our town.
I think some of the people should definitely be committed. Um, If we could have a consensus.
Hopefully
to
not me,
proceed-
Charlie.
Not selecting any individual. If we could please have a consensus on this, we could move forward from this topic.
Yes,
Who's in
don't vote.
favor of moving this to the council, this topic?
Yes.
Okay, so there's 3 of us,
No,
no, and no. So the consensus is, the vote is, this is going to move forward to the council. We could move on to the next subject. I appreciate it. Well, thank you for your thoughts, and they're important. I appreciate it. You want to go item by item, or do the board, the commission members want to pick things of interest to them?
I
The
think
only-
let's
the
just add one item, and that is with the fire department. You want to talk about that?
yeah,
That-
Informally, we spoke. I think everyone agrees that
Yes.
the volunteer should be removed from that
Yes.
section.
is that 6-9?
Can we talk about that for a second?
Sure.
Just so I understand, is the intent to give the town flexibility in the event that there are no more volunteer companies? Is that what the concern?
The concern expressed to me was, at some point, if there was no volunteers to take care of a certain section or a certain time, the town would have the option. Right now, the way I'm reading it is that the town is not allowed to pay anybody to be a fireman. And the town would like the option in case of basically an emergency at this point, to hire someone if they needed them.
Attorney D'Onofrio, in the mid 80s, we had a volunteer ambulance company that was attached to the Kensington Fire Department. It was Kensington Volunteer Ambulance. I know this, my mother was the president of the Ambulance Association. And what they found was they could no longer find volunteers during the day.
Oh, I know about that. I know there's a volunteer issue statewide. A lot of my other towns have been coming up with financial incentives to motivate volunteers, and it still doesn't work all that well.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that, because right now, fire protection is being provided by the volunteer companies.
Correct.
So I don't want there to be any interpretation that the volunteer companies are being abolished by being deleted from the charter. So my suggestion would be, rather than deleting the reference to the volunteer companies, we just come up with, or as otherwise provided by this charter or ordinance or something.
Or how
along those
about by the
lines.
town of Berlin?
Because I just don't want there to be anybody that comes along and says, next year, we have to put paid firefighters in the budget because we abolish the volunteers.
I don't think the intent is to abolish the volunteers at all. I think the intent was to allow us to move quickly in case of an emergency.
Attorney D'Onofrio, I think your point is well taken, as long as they have the flexibility of either or. And the last thing we want to do is add to additional confusion on the question, but
Absolutely.
if you can wordsmith it in a way that,
Yeah, what I would suggest, if you're okay with it, is just saying fire protection shall be provided by the volunteer companies heretofore established, comma, or as otherwise provided by this charter or by ordinance. So that way, if there is
that's fair.
some
Council-
change,
the
because, you
council-
know, like North Haven, for example, we got 65 volunteers and 28 paid firefighters. It's a hybrid model.
Oh,
And it's been that way for 25 years.
Where's that at?
North Haven,
oh,
population, that's 25,000 people.
Southington has it too. They had both.
oh.
So there's different approaches, just because you're not gonna necessarily
Well, if-
decide that,
If you can craft it so the council can create an ordinance to pay someone if we had to, I think that'd be sufficient.
well, they can. I mean, that's the reality, is we would have to, in order for there to be paid fire, there's all kinds of financial and collective bargaining issues that come up. So it would have to be either through a charter amendment or an ordinance. A lot of towns do it by ordinance.
We were trying to give the flexibility so we're not stuck like with the.
No, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
I'm trying to give you the flexibility by not deleting the volunteers, because that's the current
Oh, they're the cornerstone of the
service
community.
provider, right? So I would suggest just saying, by the volunteer companies heretofore established or as otherwise provided by this charter or by ordinance.
Sounds reasonable.
Okay.
So you're more familiar with
What's that?
the language. Does that sound like?
Yeah, it does. It sounds like the flexibility. It keeps the volunteer department, but the town council can act very quickly. All they have to do is call
Absolutely.
an ordinance committee, work with the attorneys, come up with the language, pass it out of committee, goes to council, council accepts it, and they can start doing the
We
formation.
have that
just
option.
immediately after, yeah.
Exactly.
Great, thank you.
It's a good suggestion.
In section 711, I talked to a couple of the finance board members. They just assumed not touch this section. How does everybody else feel about that? It's about the town meeting being required for unappropriated, unbudgeted.
Is that 611, what?
711. Sorry,
They want to leave it at.
just leave it as it
25,000?
is.
711.
As you pointed out, we're trying to make things less cumbersome.
So you want all of the edits removed?
There's only 2 edits, right?
No.
Changes the dollar value.
No, the edits in 711, the first set of edits have to do with the first paragraph, increasing the amount of non-budgeted appropriations from 25 to 100 and 250 to 500
So
without a town meeting.
so that's a council issue, not a Board of Finance issue?
No.
It says the council can't vote unless there's a town
Yeah,
meeting.
the Board of Finance recommends the appropriation.
Right. But now
Okay,
this
the
section
council
talks
can't-
about the,
The council can't vote on the Board of Finance recommendation without holding a town meeting if the appropriation is greater than 25,000 or the aggregate's over 250.
right,
So the request from the town was to increase those thresholds from 25 to 100 and 250 to 500.
Hey, just for clarification, I think we talked about it before. Whenever you do a town meeting, is there additional notice requirements and costs?
Yes, so town meetings, we usually will notice them.
Is there any statutory control on these amounts?
Statutory control. I mean, you can't spend, well, first of all, you can't spend $20,000 beyond what's appropriated by state law without Board of Finance and Town Council approval. Secondly, you're talking about raising the threshold for bidding to the state statutory max of 25,000.
Correct.
So there's all kinds of statutory requirements, and then you talk, this is non-budgeted appropriations,
Mhm.
right? So this is, you have a contingency line item in the budget. You want to tap into that contingency line item to fund an unencumbered, unbudgeted expenditure. The Board of Finance, elected Board of Finance, recommends to the Town Council, also elected, the approval of that use of the contingency. All we're talking about is the threshold at which there should be a town meeting. Quite frankly, $25,000 is a very, very low threshold to have a town meeting.
Is that what they want to leave?
No, they want to change it to 100.
They're okay with that change, okay. I know we wanted to. You said that.
the
Why
Board
didn't
of,
the board
you're
use-
saying Board of Finance members are indicating they
I'm
want. to
saying a
leave it
couple of
as
them said
is?
they thought that was high, but
Okay.
maybe it's not, or maybe we should let the council hash on that one too.
Well, did we not discuss on Monday that we would bring that to 50 and 250?
I think we
And
talked about
7-Eleven.
that.
No, you left it alone. You
Oh,
talked
okay.
about it and then you ultimately decided to leave it alone.
Okay.
Well, do we have a consensus? Anybody want to go to 50 or leave it?
Say we
or
leave it,
Leave it as changed?
As
to the
leave
100?
leave it as changed, right?
The next change that's in 7-Eleven in the next paragraph has to do with the timing of the transfers. As the charter is currently written, the transfers have to take place only in the last 3 months of the fiscal year. Again, that's just kind of a silly restriction, right? Because these are interdepartment appropriations. So one department needs some money from another department that is under expended and has unencumbered balance left in their appropriation. There's no good reason that I've ever heard as to why those transfers should only take place in the last 3 months of the fiscal year. So the proposal is to change it to 6 months.
And I think we had consensus maybe on that.
That part, yes, absolutely.
And then actually not the last change, the next change, other than adding or his designee after of the manager, is to add a sentence to that paragraph that says the finance director shall provide the Board of Finance with a summary of interdepartment transfers on a monthly basis. That's a change that your commission asked for. Yep. So the last change is what you talked about last time, which is the putting back in a dollar limit on the manager's authority to make line item transfers within a division of a department budget. Again, one department, different line items, town manager moving money within the budgeted appropriation for that department from line item to line item. You had requested that cap be reinstated and raised from 5,000 to 10,000.
I'm fine with leaving all the changes as they show in this one
I am
dated
as well.
6/14.
Okay.
I think 100,000 is reasonable for a town meeting. You guys okay
good.
with it? All right, we'll leave that alone then. I'm sorry.
I was thinking another item maybe that was pending from last time was where we considered calling in, is it Sal to help explain on, is it 611-6? Is that the one we were having conversation over all finance and capital leases?
I talked to, I didn't talk to, I emailed Kevin Delaney about that item. I'm glad you brought it up because I forgot to print that email, but if you give me 20 seconds, I'll pull it up here. I told him that the question came up and what did it say? Problem is I have too many emails from the town of Berlin. I mean, he said that really there's not that many. The town doesn't do a lot of leasing. He said, I'll tell you everything he said. I told him the issues that were raised in 611. He said the transfer change was designed to make operations more responsive. The current process slows things down by adding safeguards where safeguards already exist. One recent example is the Hubbard School upgrades. The town is trying to repair the Hubbard playground, stairs, and basketball court. The transfers are all within one department. Under the proposal, his proposed edit, the funds could be transferred and work could be started, POs drawn, vendors hired, materials ordered before school lets out. This would increase the likelihood of project completion before the next school year starts. Under the current charter, we are at a standstill because unencumbered funds are not available to pull POs from the capital accounts because the transfers haven't occurred. The transfer is on the agenda tonight, which was last night, but this request is 3+ weeks old. Grounds could be working as soon as school ends, but instead the project won't start until late June or late July. This is one of many examples that happens every year and during the year. Many residents complain about the pace of government. The proposed transfer change is requested to improve the pace. If the Charter Revision Commission doesn't see this as a benefit, we will continue status quo. As for the lease provision, it really only affects small operational leases. Larger leases typically have debt-like characteristics. Anything with debt-like characteristics requires a bond ordinance. For example, the recent lighting upgrades at Berlin High School had debt-like characteristics and a bond ordinance was approved. Every major lease, dollars and term, is reviewed with bond counsel. The town doesn't lease much, so this isn't a big deal either way. So that was the finance director's input on the transfers and on the lease item.
Since I raised it, I guess I'll go ahead and continue with my comment. I'd be okay with having that removed as originally suggested.
I agree. And yeah, the director of finance, I think, explained it really well.
I'm okay with it.
It was on page 25, so.
It's already removed, so we're gonna leave it.
So you want to put that back in?
Leave it scratched out.
Leave it scratched, okay. All right.
I can't think of anything else that we didn't agree on or we had continuing conversation on. Is there anything else?
Those are all the issues I had. Anybody else have any? You have anything, Sue?
No, I think we're good. I want to thank both attorneys for really providing some pretty
Absolutely.
clear language with the changes that we were looking for. Thank you.
Sure.
So what's our charge now, Kate? Do we need to formulate questions or?
We're going to move the proposed charter to the council. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So make a motion to move this to the report to the council.
which would be the red line amended.
Yes. So
Yep.
it would be this, and the two changes would be the one for the Board of Ed and to the volunteer fire department. Those are the only changes that you need.
So we need a motion to send it forward with those two changes
As complete, as amended.
as amended.
I make a motion that we go ahead and move forward with the two changes that were added to.
To move the report from the charter revision as amended tonight to the town council.
Move the report of the charter revision with the edited sections onto the town council.
Is there a second?
We touched on everything.
I believe so. VNA is already included, and we didn't talk about it tonight, but it's included.
I'm good.
So you the second?
Yep.
All right, I have a motion and a second.
Just
Discussion?
discussion, yeah. And really, I appreciate everybody's work, the town clerk, the corresponding secretary, I guess you would call her, and the attorneys, and everybody on this thing. I really thought we had gotten to a spot where there's an opportunity for it to come out unanimously. Speaking for myself, and I'm sure Julie will
Yes.
speak, with the concerns that we have for the Board of Ed, I just think we're making a very big mistake in a lot of areas. I think it could lead to the downfall of an otherwise good work product. I think the groups in town are going to organize, and it's going to be another one of those things that I would sooner avoid than go through again. So unfortunately, Mr. Chair, is not representative of your work or anybody else's work, but I will not be voting to send it forward to council because it contains two provisions that I have problems with. One is the Board of Ed, and still the Visiting Nurse Association. I understand going to the ordinance. I feel strongly that we should provide it. As many of you said too, nobody's trying to get rid of it, from what I understand, but really worried about the workers and what the residents have come to expect. I think it's a cost that we should bear because we provide service for our residents. So again, no disrespect. I think the work product was great. All of you were great, but I just feel very strongly and I won't be able to support it moving forward to council.
I also will not be supporting it going to council as well. For the Board of Ed reasons, I am in support of the VNA, unlike Joe, moving to an ordinance to allow the flexibility for the council to choose how the town will be providing the healthcare services to our residents. But I am not in support of having a partisan Board of Ed. I know that it will create quite an issue if the town council chooses to move this forward to a public hearing and then to a vote in November. I'm already aware of groups mobilizing against it. And as we heard last night, there were some people that were for it. There were some people that were against it. And having been a Board of Ed member, I can only speak from my experience in saying that there really never was an issue in regards to knowing individuals' party affiliation or running for the Board of Ed as a candidate, as a petitioning candidate, I should say, and leaving politics out of the classroom. So likewise, I will not be in favor of moving this forward to the town council.
Before we take our formal vote, I just want to thank everybody. And the issue with the VNA is important because being on the council for so many years, it's a big issue every year. And I want to save it. My mom used it and the people were fantastic. I've been a big supporter of VNA for years. But all the experts, including a couple of Democratic council people who are in the nursing field and in that business, explained to me it's not a viable model. And the council needs the flexibility to make it function. So
And Mr. Chair, in my comments, if the Board of Ed was to go away, I probably would vote for it. And I just want to say what you just said now in the record, you've said to me privately. So I genuinely know that's what you believe and you do want to find a way to preserve it. So
Thank you.
I'd like that too, I mean, I have nurses galore in my family. All three of my offspring are nurses. It just sounds like we're really looking to save this. It's like it's gonna self-implode if we don't. And I keep hearing, and I'm all about giving the great care that I'm sure they do. I know several of the nurses, and they're all wonderful. But I also hear to our residents, I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot because we're just not caring for our residents. I'm not sure where it came in that we're caring for our residents are paying for the care of New Britain or Southington or Cromwell, wherever the other patients are. I think it's we can take these steps to really save it and trim it, you know, and make it more efficient by trimming it. I don't mean eliminating people, just efficiency. If there's waste and this and that, to save it. As far as the Board of Ed, I hear a lot of great things said, this and that, and niceties, but I think in reality, there's a lot of things aren't being we're not being honest about some of the things that happen that I hear from members of the board, parents, and everything else that are going on. And a lot of what we see in the national media, where the school boards have been politicized now, and we're being blamed for doing that now. I think we're really just trying to defend the type of education, protection of our children that I would like to see, and not just me alone. I mean, put it up to the vote and let people think, but I say that things aren't going on and happening that I don't find appropriate. I just hearing it from teachers, I hear it from school board members, and I hear it from parents all the time. So I feel strongly about it. I know things get contentious, but things don't happen and you don't get progress unless we do. So I think the honesty, and it's all about integrity, transparency, brings integrity. Integrity brings accountability. I think that's what we need.
And I agree with a lot of the comments are said. VNA, I know a lot of great people are working there, and a lot of great people of Berlin have received excellent care. So I think this is just a step to be helpful and be flexible. For the Board of Ed, I think we're trying to really listen to the voters and hear their voice. All three of us have heard, or maybe even more, even people from the audience last night have said that the question was, are you representing Republican or Democrat? And at the voting polls, I'm so confused. I don't know who I'm voting for. And I think the voters are someone we have to be very transparent to give them the ability to vote the way they had hoped to vote. I think regardless of whether Democrats or Republicans are hired in or elected to the Board of Education, a lot of these candidates are parents who have a heart in what they would like to contribute to the school and do the best for the school and for the students. I don't think that'll change. I think they will always do the best that they can for the school. So I don't think that'll make a difference there. We have to be aware of the absentee ballots, people that aren't able to get out and get into public for fear of health conditions or situations. They don't have children in school anymore. This is one way that we can be transparent for voting at that time to help them with what they need to know or what they're asking to know. And I think, again, it's a sense of fairness. A lot of the other boards within Berlin all have Republican and Democrat equality in a lot of the boards, because that is a sense of fairness. It creates diversity, gives you opposing sides to have conversations and maybe come to a better conclusion than just to have all of one side. So I think we're creating a better opportunity for Board of Education and to be very successful as we have been.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Good. Take our vote then. Do we need to be polled, or how does it work? All in favor? Aye.
I
Opposed?
Nay.
Thank you.
The next item on your agenda is to talk about the questions. You don't have to be formal questions, but we should have an idea.
Chair, I'm just recalling what Kate had told us earlier in this process. I know you weren't privy to this, but there will be some questions on the ballot this year regarding voting that the state is looking to get some feedback from the voters. So I think we need to be cautious to not create too many additional questions. Where do the questions get placed on the ballot, Kate? What's the location? They are on the top, okay.
It may help this year because, as you said, there's a constitutional amendment being proposed on early voting.
Right.
So I'm hoping that generates some comments from people so that they know that there's a question on the ballot, and that will help them to the other questions.
Well, first couple of questions are pretty basic. Should the VNA become a ordinance controlled? If that's the proper word, or ordinance driven?
We can come up with a language.
Agency.
I think we just need a direction for the questions. Is that okay? Charlie, I believe- There's certain language that has to be on the question, and Attorney Donato said it has to begin with shall, has to be a yes or no,
Okay,
and has to be in current, in the.
if you could help us craft those and then with the attorney, of course. Oh, yes, sir.
Can I just say the questions really are a council function and not a charter commission function. I usually tell my commissions, you can give them your thoughts on how you think the questions should break down, but ultimately the questions are determined in the final action by the council.
That was my understanding.
We're more than happy to give work to other people. That's not a problem.
I just wanted to,
Doing it
if
either
you
way.
wanted to go
Okay.
home for dinner, I just wanted to let you know that that is something that they ultimately will do.
So it's just my understanding is that we give some direction to the council.
Right.
As far as
And it's separate for the VNA, right?
And the Board of Ed should also be a separate question. Charlie, actually, I'm looking at the PowerPoint, I believe, that you had shared last night for the public hearing. And I think you did a great job. Thank you for doing that.
No, I had lots of help. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that I don't believe it was shown actually during the public hearing, but it was pretty clear in regards to the work that we had been doing up to the point of the public hearing. So thank you for doing that. The town residency requirement for the town manager might be another one that we might want to identify. Increasing the bid limit for the town manager from 10 to 25. And then maybe the last question, kind of earmarking some language changes, and I'm not quite sure how that would look, but not getting into the minutia because there's so much language changes that were done, mostly cleanup kinds of things.
Many of the changes that are bring us in line with state statute. Somehow I'd like to convey that in the questions, that the voters understand that we're trying to move closer to the state statute instead of being in our own little world of Berlin.
I think
Well,
it's-
some of them aren't.
Yes, sir. Bring it up.
Attorney Mendick has his
Yeah.
hand up again.
Yeah, sorry. The other thing that you can do, because questions, especially a lot of the minutia, can usually be handled in one broad, what I call an omnibus question. But the way you can clarify things for voters is that under the law, you're entitled to do an explanatory text that the town clerk would put out, and that could be a chapter by chapter analysis of what you've done. So the voters would have an opportunity. You could post them at the library, town hall, you can put them on the website, but you can do an explanatory text that really can go into a little more detail. But the questions, you're kind of limited in space, and you're probably not going to be able to explain every little nit that you're fixing in the charter.
I'm just trying to avoid having too many questions. I think 3 or 4 questions should be our limit. I don't think we should.
I don't think you want to go more than, my general rule is 2 or 3 is where I like to be
Done better.
at the most.
And just to Julie's point about the town manager's residency, I heard it from a couple people last night and followed up with them. They said there was a hard push previously when they tried to change that people really felt strongly that if you're going to be the town manager, you need to live in the town. So I would just be fearful of including that in any of the omnibus language. Those 3, I think, are going to be the
No, that would be
contentious
no.
ones.
DNA, the Board of Ed and the.
And the town manager. I think the other ones are all kind of clean up. And Kate, in the past, you've done a really good job of making sure it got out. I know we had more local newspapers that helped in that area, but I know there was always a pretty big effort to let folks know what the questions were.
And I don't think the question that catch-all question that you were talking about, Attorney Mednick, should necessarily say that they're all related to, requirements by general statutes that we're bringing, because not all of them in fact are.
Correct.
Some of them are, like the one on the registrars agreeing to use one polling station based on their, consensus, that kind of stuff. That has nothing to do with the general statute. So I don't want to mislead
Oh, yeah,
any
no, no,
voter by
no.
thinking
We're
that
not-
all the
we're not-
language cleanup
No.
has to do with us bringing things up to state statutes.
Yeah.
I think that's agreed. I think what will happen is once the council acts on it, if their action is the final action, if they're not rejecting anything that you've proposed, we will sit with the council and try to figure out the best way to develop the questions. Plus also there's a publication requirement, unfortunately, in the newspaper, and we'll have to decide. You could probably do a summary for that. Jeff and I can talk about that with Kate and figure out what that needs to be. No, the omnibus question will be an accurate portrayal, not simply picking out one thing. Otherwise, it's just a question on an issue on the one thing. So we would find a way to articulate all the things that were done, and maybe, and I think that the explanatory, between the explanatory text and hopefully the newspaper publication, there would be sufficient information for the voters to make a decision.
Makes sense. Thank you.
And just so you remember, so you know this, but it's there for text that is included in all absentee ballots. So anybody who gets a ballot has the right to mark it up.
Tonight, what's left for our duties?
Well, for each of these 4 questions, where it would be the VNA, Board of Ed, the town manager residency, and then a general question that kind of puts up everything else.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
So the recommendation of questions can just be made on Tuesday night.
Yeah, we'll let the council know that, here's the draft report. And have 4 questions in mind: VNA, Board of Ed, town manager residency, and omnibus question. Catch all.
All right, so and I just draw just the summary to include the questions. The council can just talk about it.
You can put it in the town council
So
agenda item. Yeah.
Are we required to attend the town council meeting if there's any questions, or
No, it's up-
what's your advice on that?
It's up to you. I mean, they're gonna have their discussion. Obviously, main thing is to call a public hearing.
Okay.
Which will be on July 12th.
So the action is the presentation of the town, of the post report, and you said it's public hearing.
And who does the presentation?
Probably me.
Okay. Thank you, Attorney D'Onofrio.
Sure.
You've only done it how many times now?
Written
With us,
back
we've
of my
gone over
hand.
it so many times.
And then the public hearing be held, and then the council can, talk about it either after the public hearing that night or go into the next council meeting. That's why we set up the little one. And then if they have any issues with anything, that's how we
Mr. Chair, before we break up, I briefly said it in my comments, I really being back on this side of the counter here, is a little bit unnerving for me, and I don't know, and maybe I'll stay out there but this has been great, and I really appreciate all of you, and everybody came in with open, honest ideas. We exchanged it. We disagreed without being disagreeable, I think, and I just really appreciate that. You guys set a great tone, and
Well
it
put,
was very
thank you.
nice. So thank you.
Do we need to accept any minutes before we adjourn?
Well, we did at the beginning of the meeting, so at the beginning. Oh, they can't hear me yet. So at the beginning of the meeting, there's something wrong with that mic. At the beginning of the meeting, you did the June 8th.
So
Okay, so the other meetings, if you have another meeting, I'll
we'll
put
do it
those.
then. Okay, I just
minutes
didn't want to
on.
leave any housekeeping left, and if I ask for a motion to adjourn.
I think
We're
it's
good.
fine. We'll follow up if we need to.
Just want to be on a record thanking you and the two attorneys and
Oh, yes.
our
thank you,
recording
everyone.
secretary here for all their hard work.
Yeah, thank you,
All
everyone.
4 of you have been great helps and guided us amateurs through this thing. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to work with you. I said to June earlier that I've been on several charter revisions as liaison, and this has been the most fun. So-
You really got to
Just
get
fun
out.
can be, right?
Charter revision isn't
You
fun.
really got to get out more. But this was fun.
And I want to really thank Attorney Ednick and especially Attorney D'Onofrio, because I've never had that kind of support with previous town revision or the charter revision. And the fact that he is going back and forth and doing all these amendments.
We're lucky to have 2 experts. So.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
helped
very
thank
much.
so
you.
much.
Yeah, your experience and it's been valuable.
I don't know where we'd be without it. Day
Yeah.
one,
Yeah, it's huge.
still stepping on our feet.
Yeah, and just some of the examples you cited from other areas as well was,
Huge.
yeah, very helpful.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. So I'll entertain a
It's my
motion.
pleasure. Nice meeting
Folks.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Attorney Mednick.
To be continued.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye. I didn't hear it.
All right, thank you, everybody. Oh, thank you.